All right. Dr. Dave Sibley is married with 3 children and 11 grandchildren. He has a PhD in education from the University of Minnesota. Prior to teaching at the University of Northwestern, he instructed at the high school and elementary school levels for over 20 years. He frequently developed behavior plans for elementary schools, implementing school-wide programs twice. At the University of Northwestern, he teaches in the education and history departments. Dr. Sibley was the coordinator of the Social Studies Education Program and has made numerous improvements. He gives seminars on discipline, helps prepare student teachers for their placements, and leads parenting classes at our church. Welcome, Dr. Dave Sibley. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, if you could start a charity, what would it be and why?
I thought about people that tend to start charities, and I guess I would fall into the same category. It's usually something very personal to them, something that they've had an experience with. My son, my oldest boy, was very sick with cancer when he was 13. And the organization Make-A-Wish was wonderful. They came in and gave him an experience where he could travel and meet somebody that was his hero at age 13. And they just made that a wonderful experience. So I guess if I were to start a charity, it would be along the lines of helping kids that are facing life-threatening diseases, because certainly that's where my heart goes when I see young people that are sick, and it just doesn't seem fair. And anything to help them have a little bit of happiness in their lives would certainly ring true with me.
Very nice. That's lovely. Our society is currently in the midst of a pandemic, but instead of working together, we are fighting against each other, as well as the medical and scientific communities that are attempting to guide us through this dangerous time. How do we end up in this situation?
Well, when you look back historically, our country tended to pull together. When you look at the world wars, when you look at what happened during the Great Depression, there was a great deal of help and community together, especially before social programs like Social Security and so on were instituted. People would help each other out a lot. We're not doing that, as you just said. We're fighting amongst ourselves in the midst of it. So what happened? What changed? In my thinking, what happened is we used to operate under a philosophical system of Christianity. That is not to say we were a Christian country. I don't think you can make the argument that the United States was ever a Christian country. But we did take the philosophical system of Christianity and the teachings of the Bible to make up our legal system and our sense of morality and how people should behave. And even if you didn't believe necessarily in Christianity as a Christian, or even live according to that, most people still accepted what the Bible said about what was right and what was wrong. That has been superseded now by postmodernism. And postmodernism is very much an individual philosophy, where I get to pick what I believe is right. You don't have the right to tell me what I should do. My own truth is my truth, and you can have your truth, but your truth doesn't mean that I have to believe what you say. That lends itself to being, well, it's devolved over time into selfishness, pure and simple. People think that the world kind of revolves around them, and their opinion supersedes or rises to the top of everybody else. Postmodernism as a philosophical system only really works in theory. It sounds very freeing. Maslow's pyramid of self-actualization. I can be who I want to be, and so on. But in truth, when it comes down to two very conflicting truths, somebody's behavior is going to conflict with someone else, and we're going to have some way, some jurisdiction come in and resolve this. So when you look at people who attempt to operate under a postmodern system, there's a couple of caveats. One is that we all agree that there are some things on the bottom that have to be there. Okay? Nobody who believes in a postmodern system really thinks that you can't have any underlying this is right and this is wrong. They all pretty much would say murder is wrong. You just can't go into somebody's house and pull a gun out and shoot them. We have to accept that. So even people who believe at that extreme, the postmodernists would be against that. The second thing is, as they have attempted to institute these individual behaviors and saying, I have the right to do this, and they come in conflict with other people who believe something else, they truly believe that mine should supersede yours. So in theory, everybody's truth is equal, but if yours conflicts with mine, then that means that mine should supersede yours. And we see that in some of the examples of things that have happened in our society. I point out the issue of the gender in the bathrooms and how one group or even one individual thinks that in their right is to use whichever bathroom, locker room that they want to use. And the other side is saying, no, you don't have that right. You can't go into a locker room that's the opposite gender that biologically you are. And so then the courts get involved and somebody has to say, no, this right supersedes that right. So in theory, people who believe in postmodernism really believe that their beliefs supersede everybody else's. They're not willing to accept everybody's as equal to theirs. And as I said, I think postmodernism now has devolved into selfishness. People really want to see the world the way they want to see the world. And I look at examples in society like advertising. I see Christmas advertisements now that say, you should buy something for yourself. You should get yourself a new car. It's Christmas. You've bought things for everybody else, so it's okay to focus on yourself. When I was growing up, I never saw commercials like that. That was not the message of Christmas. That back then it was more about giving than it was about receiving. But nowadays, and that resonates with lots of people. Yeah, I should do that. I should get that for myself because I deserve it. Selfishness, as we know as Christians, is a very natural attitude to take. You have to work really hard to overcome selfishness and be more selfless and be more servants to others. But our society has, by and large, accepted the fact that being selfish is okay. And we shouldn't see that as a bad thing anymore. And so how did we get into this spot? Lots of people look at what's going on, and if you're asking them to do something to protect others, or you're asking them to sacrifice something that they wanted to do, they have a hard time with it because I want what I want.
Yeah, let's face it, it's not fun wearing a mask when it's 90 outside. I mean, that's not pleasant. It's a hard thing to do consistently, but certainly not as hard as others who have sacrificed for our country or for each other. Do you think this is related to why we're seeing so many conspiracy theories and false dichotomies and general distrust of scientists and medical experts?
There's a number of reasons why I think our society has gone in that direction. The first one that I thought about was um, in the turmoil and the social upheaval that took place in the time of the 60s. One of the desires of people at that time was to create a more egalitarian society. They wanted to increase the rights of minorities. They wanted women's rights to increase as well, so that across our society, we didn't have the hierarchies and the stratified society that we used to have, which in many ways is a good thing. There isn't any reason why a brain surgeon is inherently more valuable or more important um, as a person than anybody else in society. But unfortunately, what's happened is when we got rid of the layers of society and saying this person is no more important as a person than anybody else, we also threw out the fact that their opinion might be more valuable. So, someone who's studied infectious diseases and worked with them has lots of experience. Their opinion about what we should do in society is definitely more valuable. But unfortunately, people's reaction to that is, well, that's his opinion, mine's just as valid, which scientifically speaking, that's not true. I've had lots of opinions about why my car is acting up, but I trust the opinion of my mechanic more than myself because he tends to get it right, and I just throw money at it and doesn't get fixed. So this move towards an egalitarian has unfortunately diminished the value that we place on people's expertise and experience. Their opinion does matter more, even if they aren't necessarily inherently more important.
Thank you. Yeah, I had not connected those two in that same way, but I certainly see a decrease in the respect for expertise or value in the opinion of people who have expertise on a subject, where everybody's opinion now is just as valid. Anybody can have an idea, and there isn't a need for expertise in our culture. It seems,
Yeah.
especially right now.
Um,
As a,
I was People don't understand science as well either. You and I
mm,
have discussed that there's a lack of understanding about what science is really all about and what they're attempting to do. Most of science is theories and hypothesis and trying to answer the unknown, and the end result is more unknowns, more uncertainty. And people struggle with the fact that science doesn't always give this is the answer. And as we look at the past 4 months of dealing with this, science started out telling us a number of things. Don't do this, do this. And some of those have proven to not necessarily be connected to the virus. They've backed off on how contagious they think it is in terms of touching things. If you wash your hands well, they now say you're probably safe to use public restrooms and so forth. Um, they've also backed up. There was a theory early on about certain, like ibuprofen. Don't take ibuprofen. Well, now they've said you probably you shouldn't take ibuprofen if you have COVID. But if you don't have COVID, it's perfectly safe to go ahead and take that. It doesn't give you the virus. So that uncertainty that science raises is hard for people. They want a definitive answer. And if science and medicine aren't giving it to them, then they feel like, well, those guys don't know any more than I do, which is not true. They know a whole lot more. They just don't have an absolute answer. Um, and when you think about it, we have to trust the expert because the abstract thinking that's required to solve some of these issues, lots of people don't do that well. They either never developed the ability to think abstractly and deeply about this and face things on a continuum with uncertainties, or it's just really hard work. And they shy away from some of those things because it's a lot easier to just think black and white and take a stand and just defend that whatever comes up. Science is all about moving into the areas where there aren't absolute answers always, and that abstractness and uncertainty is very hard for society. Another factor that comes up, and this is kind of sad, but some people are reacting to science and medicine now by rejecting what they're saying because science and medicine have engaged in some schlock kinds of experiments. They've come out and said things. They've gotten scientists who, I've heard it said, basically sell their credentials to somebody so that they can put their name on something, and it's not good science. The idea of working backwards, of saying, this is what I want my conclusion to be. And so now I'm going to work backwards to find some evidence or run a tightly controlled experiment that it will guarantee to give me this result. That's not real science, and yet that's unfortunately what scientists have been accused of over the past few decades. They have done that. You can find scientists that will tell you that global warming is definitely not a real thing. There was a couple of doctors who out in California who wanted their business back up and running, and so they said that COVID was really waning and it was perfectly safe to come back. And so we're seeing some of this science not doing what it's supposed to do, and that has had a negative reaction by people. When they see that, they say, well, I can't trust science. Look at what they're doing. That's probably on the scientists themselves to address the fact that their integrity has taken a hit because of some of the members of their community not doing the work and doing it diligently the way that they were supposed to.
That kind of goes back to the selfishness and greediness that we were just talking about too. Scientists aren't immune from that greed sometimes, and not all of them have pure motives. But overall, the scientific process, when followed, helps us to understand the natural world, the physical world better, by observing and making measurements. It is unfortunate that there are some who exploit it. And politicians have been exploiting it a lot too. I think every politician has done their very best to exploit the situation for their cause.
I think if we had somebody to respond to your last statement, Doctor, they might make this argument. Science kind of has a self-governing principle with the scientific method, and this idea that you mentioned, that there is a degree of uncertainty, and when somebody puts together or puts forward a hypothesis, the method in science is to attack it and to see if it stays worthy of being called a theory or something like that. So there seems to be a self-policing within the scientific community about things like that. I think it was George Will who said there's nothing so depraved that you can't fly in some professor from somewhere to justify it. So you're going to have your kooks and your quacks and the two doctors on YouTube saying COVID's no big deal. But ultimately, when you have a community basically in agreement, was it Jeremy Shapiro who was writing on dichotomous thinking, said three things you see in the news today where you find dichotomous thinking taking place, with the COVID virus, with evolutionary biology, and with the people who are anti-vaccine. And you see this kind of black and white thinking in these areas. And they're getting help, as Kristine said, from politicians who seem to be fanning the kind of conspiracy theory behind these things, that that it's a government movement or a worldwide thing. So in defense of the scientists, when you have a vast majority of scientists coming to a conclusion on something like the virus or something like global warming, what is your response to that? Ultimately, are we pointing our finger at the scientists on that one to clean up their game? Or doesn't it take accountability and responsibility from leadership in both the political and the religious worlds to agree with the intellectuals, to agree with the experts when they're in vast agreement?
We certainly want the leaders in our country to lead by using the resources that are available to them. We don't expect our leaders to be scientists or experts in all different areas. We expect them to be leaders and to use what's available to them. You're absolutely right when you say that the science community polices itself, and in truth, they do a good job, but it's almost a closed system in the sense that they read each other's papers and they respond to that. And if you go into their world, you can read criticisms of research that was done poorly and questionable, and the community will come together against results that really look like they were manufactured, and they will discredit that study. But unfortunately, once the study is out there, then the leaders, the community, especially in today's world where we tend to look for things that agree or back up or support what it is we already believe. And so they will find the negative or the poorly done science, and they will use that as an example. In my courses, one of the things that we discuss is global warming. And so I've had a number of my students write that global warming doesn't exist or it's way overblown. And then they will list their sources where they find this information. And so I've had an opportunity to go and read some of these sites and look what's there. And it's very poorly done. It was basically, we're going to start with the assumption that global warming is not happening, and then we're going to find some research and some data to support that. It's not good science. And yet those kids who write those papers for me, they're starting from a position of, I don't believe it's happening, and here, I found this to support what I'm saying. So yes, the leaders in our country are the ones who really need to point to the good science. They're the ones who need to let the experts tell them or tell us what we should be doing and agree with that. We trust them not to make this political and to not use this to better some other aspect other than ourselves. The economy, corporations, their own personal agendas to get reelected. We trust them not to do this, to not take this and use it against us.
So in follow-up, as a result of this virus and the current push for social change, our society is becoming more and more polarized. Stereotyping has become commonplace, and groups are advocating for extreme positions like critical theory. What's driving this?
Well, stereotyping obviously isn't something new. Stereotyping is a corrupted form of how we learn and how we incorporate new people and new ideas and everything into our thinking. Assimilation and accommodation are what they tell us people use in order to understand new things. They assimilate new information and they accommodate old ideas to accept the new ones. So we have a tendency to try and look for similarities and make groupings out of the things that we see. Stereotyping, unfortunately, is when we do that in such a way that our purpose is not to understand it or to make it part of what we know, but instead it's used to subjugate people or to segregate them. And so we look for things that we can add to the group of people or the beliefs that others have that make it to portray it in a negative light. Again, it's kind of that working backwards idea. I don't like your idea. I don't like your group of people that you belong to. And so therefore, I'm going to pull together all the negative commonalities that exist between your ideas and the people that you are, and I'm going to paint them in a very negative light and make it sound like they're really bad people or they're really bad ideas. Critical theory is an extreme form of stereotyping. They're basically saying you are not an individual. You are just a product of all the different groups that you belong to, which I now can stereotype into this and this and this and this. And so therefore, I don't need to listen to you because I already know what you're going to say. You're part of that group, so you all believe exactly what that group believes. And I can discount everything that you say. This exacerbates the polarization that's taking place in our country because it prevents any kind of discussion or compromise. And this is happening because people are pulling apart in our society more out of the selfishness, out of the fact that I want what I want and your group hasn't traditionally supported me or that belief hasn't helped me in the past. And so I'm going to push it away and I'm going to say that it's bad and I don't need to pay any attention to it. Living in a democracy and having critical theory where I don't need to listen to you and we don't need to discuss ideas is very dangerous. You're not going to be able to deal with the interdependentness of our society or the complexities at all because there are so many differences. There are so many situations that you have to compromise and think about what's going to work best for the majority of people. And if you're unwilling to even look at what the other person's saying because you've already stereotyped them into a group that is irrelevant, it's very dangerous for our country.
So, like, do you see hope? Where do you see hope? How do we get out of this? That's not one of our questions.
Give me a tough question. How do we get out of this? One of the things that we talked about, and maybe that's what maybe we can look at it from this standpoint. We talked about, why are Christians the ones that are fighting against some of these things? Why do we see the evangelicals not speaking up? The truth of the matter is Christians historically don't take leadership when there's things in our society that are wrong. We tend to serve, we tend to help the individuals, but we don't take the lead in speaking out and saying that's wrong. The Christians in Germany, in Nazi Germany, didn't say anything. And in our own country, Christians didn't say anything about slavery. They didn't lead the opposition to the Jim Crow laws. Now, certainly there were some. The abolitionists were largely Christian. And that movement started, which resulted, in a lot of pressure to get rid of slavery. But by and large, we don't speak out. We don't take the lead and say, hey, that's not right. That we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be stereotyping people. We shouldn't be mistreating people. Really shouldn't go down that path. So if you're asking me, is there a way out? I don't know that it has to be Christians, although certainly you can present this to Christians because it's part of the teachings of the Bible. We really need to start living out our faith, which says we put other people as more important than ourselves, which is the antithesis of selfishness. It's not what I want, it's what's good for other people that I should be promoting. And if we begin to live that way and speak that way and say we really need to think about other people and place their interests first, I think we can begin to break down some of these entrenched positions of it's all about me. I think we really need to go back to the point, at least as a group and hopefully as a nation, of saying selfishness and being self-centered is not a virtue. That's not good for anybody, and it's not good for us collectively. And speak out about that and say, no, it's not all right for you to make those kinds of statements. It's not all right for you to stereotype and criticize other people. I really think that as Christians, we are subject to the same pressures, the same temptations, the same selfishness, the same pride that everybody else is subjected to. And we really need to rise above those things. It's supposed to be our behavior and our witness that draws people to Christ. And I think we do collectively a really poor job of that. I know Kristine and I've shared this story before, but to me it's so exemplary of the failure of our lives to influence others. And that is the story of Gandhi. After studying Christianity, said that based upon what he read, he probably would be a Christian if he'd ever met one. Well, he'd met lots of people who said they were Christians. He just never saw anybody living out their faith. So in order for us to break this stuff down, we really need to become the kind of people that Christ wanted us to be and get rid of the selfishness and place others first. Christians can't say things like, I have a right to not wear a mask. I don't read the Bible saying anything about rights. If anything, it talks about the rights of other people and how we should be promoting those. It just doesn't talk about personal rights. So saying as a Christian, I have a right not to wear a mask and I have the right to go to church, I don't read that in the Bible. That's a message that we should fight against and instead spend more time thinking about how we can help our society as a whole.
So do you think it's that selfishness that's driving some Christians to not want to wear masks and not to take this virus seriously?
Well, to be honest, I think there are some people that they're afraid of the virus. They truly are frightened. And you've heard stories of people who someone's wearing a mask and someone else will come up to them in the store and say, what are you wearing that mask for? You shouldn't be doing that. What, are you afraid? Well, the truth of the matter is the person attacking them is really the one that's afraid. They're living in denial. They don't want to face this. It's selfishness plus it's fear. I really don't want this going on. I had plans for this summer. I really want to be able to go and shop and do the things that I want. And I'm also very much afraid of this virus. And when you see people attacking other people about wearing masks, it's more about I'm living in denial that it's happening, and seeing you wear a mask makes me think about it. And I'm mad about the virus, and I'm mad that you're reminding me that it's there and I don't like it, so I'm going to attack you. So are Christians doing that? I think Christians are living in denial as well. They don't want this. It's hard, and I'd rather that we all just pretended it was gone and go back to church.
Yeah, I've seen that denial too. And so to bring it all the way back to the beginning, it seems like some of that denial is, again, not listening to the experts, not valuing expert opinions above their own opinion, or maybe listening to the opinions of some of the discredited scientists who are acting out of selfishness. What would be a message to people watching this? How do we in truth and love press against the Christians who are listening to poor quality opinions? How do we do this in a way that brings unity, but also highlights the truth, that builds relationships, but still protects the vulnerable in our society?
Don't think you're going to get anywhere by discussing or arguing about the behaviors, about wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, or social distance, should church be back in session meeting, and so on. I think it's more valuable to get at the root of the problem and talk about, why do you feel that way? What's driving you to feel that you don't need to wear a mask? And then you've got to get past the, well, I have a right. Well, what does that right say? And why do you believe that you have that right? To really get the introspection thinking about, why am I behaving the way I'm behaving? And if we can do that in a loving fashion and get them to compare what they're believing and how they're behaving to what their faith is telling them, maybe we can get them to change their minds and move in the direction of what we as Christians actually should be doing.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and push back at you both. When you both say that they're not listening to experts, I think if we had one of them here, they'd say they are listening to experts. They're listening to Franklin Graham and President Trump and Fox News. They have their experts that they'd cite. As David said earlier, some of his kids, they cite so-called experts. Mm-hmm. But so what would your response be to that when they how did that creep into Western Christianity, this distrust of science and this almost an anti-intellectualism?
I think that it crept in as a desire to get back to being faithful to Scripture. This idea that we need to stand strongly against maybe liberal twistings of Scripture or liberal dismissal of, say, miracles, and to get back to a fundamental understanding of Scripture. And that swing has gone too far back. And instead of a faithful understanding of Scripture and its original intent and the author's intent and the culture and context of Scripture at that point, it's become an extremely postmodern, post-Enlightenment, literalistic reading in English of some passages of Scripture, combined with some of the theology from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that has led to this kind of a rejecting the scientists. They're too liberal. They're saying things that we don't think lines up with our understanding of the Bible. The Bible should be higher than science, but they're mistaking, or they're equating a particular theological interpretation of Scripture with what the Bible truly says. And I think that's kind of a root, or at least a driver, in looking at some sources as reliable versus others.
I will answer that question more, or your comment more, along the lines of a social response. I remember reading an article quite some time ago, before the 2016 election, and the response was along the lines of, why are liberals surprised at the response of conservatives to what they're doing. Our higher education systems in this country are notoriously left-leaning. And there have been a number of years when they dominated society in the direction in which we were going, pulling us to areas and behaviors that a lot of our mainstream society thought was extreme. Like, we're willing to accept behavior A, but you want behavior way out here beyond that. And so this article was saying, as far as you attempt to pull us to the left, the right is going to have an equal response in the other direction, to the point where you say this is right, then we're going to say the exact opposite is right. And then you add in, as we said, the stereotyping and the not wanting to listen to the other side. And you can see where the people on the right basically are looking at who's saying things about the virus and which side of the political spectrum are they on. And if they're on the left side, then we're not listening to them. They may be the experts, but they're liberals. And we see what they did in the past. We've seen what they were promoting in the past. That doesn't line up with our faith at all. And so we're not listening. So if this doctor, if we get any whiff that this doctor or scientist is liberal, then we don't listen. Which is why some people, you say Fox News, that's all they'll listen to. That becomes their source for all truth, because the other sources of news and information, they regard them as left-leaning, and so therefore they don't trust them and they refuse to listen to anything that they're saying. The experts that Fox News, those are the experts we will listen to, because politically and faith-wise, supposedly they line up with what we believe.
Does the voice of Sean Hannity then and Donald Trump take more precedent than the voice of Jesus with many in Western Christianity?
I think when you look at how we live our lives, those people have always had more influence. Being a Christian is hard. You look at what Christ said about how to live your life, how to treat other people. That's a major transformation in how we live in the West. Put others first, to be a servant for others, that's asking a lot of people. And we really balk at that. So we're much more comfortable listening to other people who tell us that what we're doing and the way we're living is perfectly okay. You don't need to change. Kristine and I have encountered some of that just in our church, as some of the teachings have tried to get people to change some of their behaviors with regards to reaching out to the community. And there's been backlash against it. There was an article in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune just today about preaching about racism in rural areas and how that's very difficult because they don't want to hear that. So yes, we all like news and people who tickle our ears more than the ones who tell us the real truth.
So Kristine, now my question is for you, because you asked the doctor about hope. If all that we're hearing is close to the truth, close to the target being true, and in Christianity in America is in such a state that they seem to be leaning more like Old Testament prophets, right? You know, slaying the prophets of Baal. They like that story better than the Good Samaritan or other stories that Jesus told in the New Testament. Yet they still claim to be living biblical. How are we going to reach them as say Martin Luther King Jr. did when he asked what was his goal, and why didn't he try and romance more politicians? He said, because my goal was to bring conviction to the white church in America, which wasn't living up to their Christian values. How do we do that today? How do we remind our Christian brothers and sisters that the message we are to be following is from Jesus, not Elijah?
It's really hard. I guess for me and for our family, I think it's a one person at a time. I think we do what we can. We look at our skills and giftings, and we take action, and we try to serve in our community and help the way that we can, and try to be an example. It's one conversation at a time. One-on-one, I think, is much more powerful than a Facebook post or commenting on somebody's thread where they have a different perspective. Facebook can be a wonderful opportunity to share ideas, but I think a one-on-one relationship is more important. I think when we talk with people, and we can point to Jesus and his example, we can live it out, and that offers hope for people to see that people are living out what their faith convicts them to do. And at the same time, none of us are perfect. We all have biases. We all have shortcomings. We all say dumb things sometimes. But a life well lived over a period of time has a powerful testimony.
All right, last question, and it's to you both. I've spent a lot of time studying the nuns and the duns, people who have left the faith, or who just they walk right by it, and they're nothing is attractive to them about the Christian faith. One of the reasons that both groups give in their disinterest to modern Christianity, or at least Western Christianity, is that Christianity appears to be science denial. They deny science, and there doesn't seem to be room for doubt. The hard questions aren't treated the same as they are. So let's say in a science environment that encourages questions, hard questions in Christianity or church are sometimes shunned. What do you two say to that?
Well, I remember asking hard questions, and somebody responded to me, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Stop asking questions." And I just went, but doesn't God have the capability to work with me on this? I mean, I'm trying here. Can't you help me? Can't you point me to resources? And it was really frustrating, especially as a young person. I had a youth pastor that if he thought that I didn't see him, he'd hide from me. He'd go duck around a corner or pop into an office because I had questions. And it was frustrating to know that he wasn't willing to help me figure out answers to tough questions. I think we can do better than that. I think there are so many more resources available. There are Christians who are asking these hard questions and talking about them, and there might not be answers for everything yet, but there are discussions that are going on, and we certainly don't need to send young people away, turn them away because they have questions. We should engage in those questions.
When I think about pastors that have worked with younger people and so on, how to reach them, he said you need to present what you're telling them as the answer to a need that they have. They have questions. And if the church isn't addressing those questions and meeting those needs, then the people see no relevance in listening to us or seeking our advice. My students at Northwestern, we've had discussions in one of my classes where we were talking about adolescent sexuality, and they revealed to me that a number of them weren't getting direction in that area from their parents, which isn't all that unusual. But then they didn't get it from the church either. Like the church was absolutely silent on that. And this entire group of students I'm talking to, they all had questions. They all had needs. The church definitely should have an opinion about those topics and should answer those hard questions and help them figure out those areas. If we're not meeting the needs of the people who are looking at us, if we don't present answers to their tough questions, then I agree with them. Why would they want to pay attention to us? We don't look a whole lot different, unfortunately, in the way we live our lives. So people don't come anymore just because it's the thing to do. Churches are not the thing to do anymore. They have to offer something. And I don't mean the coffee and donuts afterward. They have to offer answers to the tough things that I'm dealing with. And if they're not willing to do that, then I don't want to waste my time.
That's where your one-on-one work comes in, Kristine, with people who aren't willing to step into a church, but they're within your sphere of influence and you can reach out to them. Doctor, is there anything else you wanted to say? How can people follow you in this world of social media?
You would have a really hard time finding me on social media.
Okay.
I'm hoping that this leads to a CNN interview or Dr. Phil or something, but otherwise I'm not out there. So.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to have you back again soon, talk about some tough questions.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me.